Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this series I'm sharing my trip to England and Scotland, where I spent 2 days in London and 2 weeks traveling around Scotland, visiting distilleries, and met up with a few fellow whiskey tubers. So after spending a day in near Glasgow with Roy from Aquavite, we visited a resurrected distillery, Annandale, and I headed then west to Campbelltown. I've already posted my review on Springbank. Well, the same day that I visited Springbank, I then went next door to Glengyle, which is also owned by Springbank Distillery. In fact, they have the same staff there, and they're using the same warehouse to run the distillery. Currently, the distillery is still in the process of being resurrected. They don't have their own warehouse, so currently their casks are in the same warehouse as Springbank. Of course, they're stamped with Kilkerran on it, so they don't get them mixed up. But it has its own production facility in terms of stills, mash tuns, and so forth. The layout of the distillery is similar to, and you'll see this in upcoming videos, to the Isle of Arran Distillery and Lag Distillery, in that it's a pretty sort of simple, almost one floor production where everything is sort of within eye view on a single floor. But I'm going to show you some photos and some video that I took while touring the distillery. But I'll tell you a little bit about the distillery itself. So it was founded in 1872 and then completed in 1873. But in 1919, it was sold due to post-war recession. So a lot of distilleries, there were like 20 to 30 distilleries in the Campbelltown region, and they were closing up. Then 1925, it completely ceased production. The stills were then sold off, all the equipment was sold off, so there was nothing to resurrect at the time. The property was in use for a gun range and for a number of other things. Can you imagine, I don't know, going to a rifle range and it used to be a distillery? But if you're preparing for war, going into the First War, the Second World War, and needed some place to practice your shooting, I guess that was the place to do it. Then in 2000, it was purchased by Mitchell's Glengyle Limited. They went into production in 2004 with the first release in 2007. But all the equipment that they then had in this new distillery was previously made for Ben Wyvis Distillery, but they then took the stills and modified it to their configuration that they wanted to make it distinct from Springbank, because it's not an expansion of Springbank. It's its own identity, producing its own unique malts. And so they modified it to give it a lighter, more delicate spirit. Well, 4 years after rebuilding, it finally went into production in 2004, as I said, and the first release was in 2007. So if you're going to visit Springbank Distillery, I highly recommend also booking a tour for Glengyle Distillery. Now, where Springbank has, its own visitor center, and you can go in, if you wanted to, you don't have to do a tour, you could just do some tasting. Glengyle isn't fully set up like that. So you're actually going to book through Springbank, and then someone from Springbank is going to walk over next door and do the tour with you at Glengyle Distillery. And I highly recommend it. Now, right next door to Springbank and Glengyle Distillery is a church. You'll see it in the video. And the view of the steeple of the church is viewable through sort of a hole in the wall of Glengyle Distillery. And so that sort of became and you'll see that in the video as well, and that became the icon or the image for Kilkerran. Now, why do they call it Kilkerran and not call it Glengyle? Well, it's sort of, they don't overtly talk about this a whole lot, but the name Glengyle is owned by Loch Lomond Distillery. They produce their vatted malt or blended malt from that. And you go, okay, why is that? Why would they buy the name? And why wouldn't they perhaps sell the name to Springbank Distillery to use for Glengyle? So they can put Glengyle straight on the bottle in terms of what they name their whiskeys. Because Loch Lomond owns a Campbelltown distillery called Glen Scotia. Glen Scotia, right. Gee, could they be concerned about some competition? Could they be concerned about, is there some reason why they would want to sort of hold on to that name and not allow their neighbor to use it? I don't know, but it always seems in the whiskey industry there's some sort of drama that goes on. Whether you're talking about in Kentucky or in Texas or in Scotland, there's always drama. There's historical drama between Ardbeg and Laphroaig. I won't go into that right now, but they had a little squabble over the use of water rights. Well, apparently there's a little bit of a tiff regarding the use of this name as well. Alrighty, so hey, check out a video and do a virtual tour of Glengyle Distillery. Alrighty, so I brought back a bottle from the distillery. This is the Kilkerran Open Day 2019. This is a distillery edition, 15-year-old bourbon cask, and it's bottled at 57.1% alcohol by volume. Now you can see I've gotten past the shoulder a little bit. I'm really enjoying this whiskey, and it really does have its own distinct identity from anything you would get at Springbank. So there's a lot of oak notes. If you like bourbon, this is like things you get from a bourbon minus the corn. So a lot of the cask influence, the spices, the vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, huge amount of vanilla, caramel, maybe a little bit of tropical note, sort of like banana chips or slightly overripe bananas. Definitely some apple, some pear. There's a maltiness there as well. Now people talk about a Campbelltown funk. I'm not all that sensitive to whatever funk there is associated with Springbank or Campbelltown in general, but I don't pick up any funk. There is a little bit of a saltiness character to it. All right, on the palate. Wow. So I'm drinking this neat, but I've had this on ice and I've had this with water. This is a whiskey. It is so intense, so flavorsome. It's almost like someone turning on the music and turning it up to 11. It's like, whoa, back the volume down a little bit. It's too much, right? It's so intensely flavored. This is easier and gentler to approach if you put it on ice or just give it a little bit of water. But for this purpose, I'm trying it neat. Definitely apple and pear. Reminded me more of some canned pear, yellow apples. As I mentioned before, the spice notes from the oak, cinnamon, nutmeg, a little bit of cardamom, vanilla, lighter caramels, just a wee bit of a saltiness, Really, really, really nice. This is an absolutely spectacular whiskey that I think rightly reflects the region and the producer. I really, really like this. Now, what am I going to give this as a score? I'm going to give it a solid 90 points. A solid 90 points. However, I would say when I was first getting into whiskey reviews 3 years ago, I approached whiskey in many ways in the same way I approached wine, which is the attitude of you evaluate it as it was produced from the winery or the distillery. So I was not into adding water or considering how it would be reflected, having some water ice, but now I do. Just as with a wine, as I've been doing on my wine channel, allow a bottle of wine to breathe, right? To open up, right? Not just straight from the bottle, but allow it to open up. That'll get a little bit of oxygen. I would never add water to a wine. In the same way, in which you allow a wine to open up through decanting, in the same way you would allow it to open up in terms of getting it past the neck pour and the shoulder, but also try it in different ways and judge or critique the whiskey, evaluate the whiskey in its entirety in all the different ways in which you could enjoy the whiskey, and then in a summary fashion, I give it a point score from there. So I've ceased doing this. I just never really talked about it. I've ceased giving scores based on how it is neat. I give an overall score based on all the different ways in which I've tried it, from the neck to the shoulder with a little bit of water on ice, and then an overall assessment of the whiskey. That's what my 90 points comes from, not just from trying it neat. Alrighty, if you have a chance to go to Campbelltown, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It is very much a sense of an old world region. It's a very small town. It's a lovely drive down the Kintyre Peninsula, or if you take the ferry, as I did, from Androssan, it's a really, really a nice ride. Highly recommend going down there. And if you have some extra time, walk down the street to Cadenhead's, which is right down, and they have all kinds of bottles you can try there. And if you're interested in the history of Scotch whiskey, you can also get a map of the closed distilleries and just get a sense of the place and going around seeing where they used to be. Some have been converted to hotels, some restaurants, some it's just a closed building. Campbelltown right now currently is sort of a ghost town of its former glory. What used to be the Scotch whiskey city, the city of Scotch whiskey. Now there's but 3 remaining. And Glengyle primarily was opened so that Campbelltown could stand on its own and be recognized by the SWA as a region, rather than being put under the umbrella of the Lowlands or the Highlands. That's one of the primary reasons why the distillery was opened. I am hoping that there will be a growing interest in opening new distilleries in Campbelltown, or even perhaps, if it's possible, resurrecting some distilleries. As you saw previously, I did a video on Annandale, in which Roy and I visited Annandale, a resurrected distillery. This is also a resurrected distillery. In fact, this is probably the distillery that kicked off, at the very early stages, that kicked off the current renaissance that we are experiencing in Scotland. And the other distilleries, there's new distilleries as well as expanded distilleries as part of this renaissance as well. So my hope is that Campbelltown will get some cash flow into it, bring in more tourism, which will be a great benefit to the people who are living there. The Springbank currently has a school, a 1-week school. It's very, very difficult to get into. It's like a 2-year wait. I am hoping to perhaps get into it in the year 2020. I'm on the waiting list. But something like that could bring in more people in terms of it becoming a learning center of the Scotch whiskey industry. There's very few places you can go to actually get hands-on experience. I would love to spend a week working there, or either at Springbank or at Glengyle. I think it would be absolutely awesome. You get a better understanding of the whiskey when you've had some hands-on experience and getting behind the scenes understanding of what it takes to put this into a glass. Alrighty, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you haven't yet subscribed, if you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. Share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and other social network channels. And if you want to be notified when I go live or when I post a new video, you're going to want to hit the bell down below. Alright, until next time, cheers. Hey, if you like my review, be sure to check out these other whiskey videos.